Hi, welcome on our talk about fingerprint cloning, myth or reality. My name is Paul Rascagnière and I'm security researcher at Cisco Talos. I'm mainly interested on APT and malware analysis, but for this specific talk we will speak about something I really enjoy is 3D printing.
Hi, I'm Vitor Ventura. I'm a researcher with Cisco Talos located in Portugal. I like to do reverse engineering and especially looking into instant security messengers. This is our agenda for today. First, we'll start by looking at the state of the art of fingerprint authentication and the several sensor types that are in the market. Afterwards, we'll present to you our research. We'll start by looking into the threat model that we defined, then we'll go through our process, and finally we'll present our results and we'll do the wrap-up about the research. Fingerprint authentication was made available to the masses back in 2013 when Apple launched Touch ID. It was defeated that same year at the CCC conference. Throughout the years, several attempts have been made to defeat different kinds of fingerprint authentications. More recently, Samsung S10 was defeated by a simple silicon cover. This showed the fragility of the system and led us to make our own research. During our research, XLab security research team also made a demonstration that it was able to bypass the fingerprint authentication on 3 different devices. However, they did not reveal any details. As such, we decided to move on with our research and share all of our results with the public. Now let's look at the different kinds of sensors. The first one is the capacitive one. This sensor uses the natural elasticity in our bodies to create the fingerprint in the sensor. The ridges in our fingerprints in touch with the sensor will create a capacitor which is detected by the sensor. The valleys will create a hair gap which don't create a capacitor and will not be detected by the sensor. The second kind of sensor, it's the active one. So it's a capacitive sensor, but instead of using the natural electricity in our bodies, it will use a signal that is sent from the sensor itself through our skin into the sensor again. These kind of sensors usually have a ring around them which will send the signal. Let's talk about the optical sensor now. These ones have 2 different components, a light source and an image sensor. The light source will emit the light that is reflected by our finger that will be detected by the image sensor. These ones were one of the first kind of sensors that were made, and they were abandoned for a while. They are now back being used because of the need for the mobile phones to have a full frame, as they can be put below the display. The ultrasonic sensors are also made out of 2 components. An emitter that will send an ultrasonic pulse that will be detected by the sensor, making an image of the fingerprint. These kind of sensors were developed having in mind the full-frame mobiles because they can be placed under the screen. Our research is not just about defeating the fingerprint authentication. It's about keeping it as real as possible. And for that, we defined 3 different threat scenarios. The first one is what we called the direct collection method. This means that someone picks the victim finger and just put it on the mold. The second method is the one based on images. Just imagine when you cross the border and the officers take your fingerprint, or when a private security company asks to get your fingerprints. And the third one is by lifting a fingerprint from an object and then creating the mold from there. These were the ones that we defined as 3 different threat scenarios for our research. But our research is not just about the collection. We have 3 different steps. The first one is the collection, as I've mentioned. The second one is the optimization. As you might imagine, if we are getting the print from an image, and then we need to create a 3D object, and there's optimizations to be done along the way. And the third process is actually the creation of the mold. But for all of these details, I'll leave you now for my colleague Paul.
Let's speak about the collection. The first methodology we use is direct collection. We decided to use plastilene, which is an artificial clay that reacts to heat. As you can see on the picture, on the right you have a heat gun that is used to make the clay soft and take my fingerprint. The second collection was performed by an optical sensor. You can buy it really easily. It's really cheap. It's less than 20 euros to get this kind of sensor. And you can communicate with it directly in USB and you can use this kind of application to get the fingerprint. As you can see, the resolution of the fingerprint is not really good, but we discovered that it's good enough to create a fake fingerprint, as we will see later. So the third collection we decided in our scenarios is a third-party collection directly on the glass. Here you can see an example of pictures. On the left, it's a picture directly from the camera without any modification. And we decided to create picture of the palm print, fingerprint, if you wish, and not directly my fingerprint, because I don't really want to leak my fingerprint on presentation. So each time we will speak about glass fingerprint copy, it will be about my palm. And you will see later fingerprint of Al Capone. And that's exactly why we decided to use Al Capone fingerprint. It's public information, it's available on the internet, and it's better than leaking my own fingerprint. So once we have all this data, we need to optimize them. So for example, we can speak about photo optimization. Here is a fingerprint from Al Capone, directly from the website of the FBI. And how we work, we cannot take the fingerprint in one piece. We take small part of the fingerprint. Like if you look on the picture, we have 4 different parts, and we put all the parts together in order to get a whole picture of the fingerprint. If you take the resolution of the sensor, for example, it's too small, and we cannot have a full finger directly on one picture on the sensor. We need to get small part and make a big picture of the small part. And this big picture is used to create the mold where the fake fingerprint will be created. Another example of optimization is this kind of photo optimization. You can see on the left the picture simply with black powder on it to increase the contrast. And after I cut the picture on the good size, exactly the fingerprint. And finally, I had to play with a photo editor in order to increase the contrast and have a really good black and white image. Finally, the creation of the mold. Here is a screenshot of the Al Capone fingerprint on the left and a 3D model of the mold used to create the fake fingerprint. We will see later a small video about how I create exactly this mold for Al Capone fingerprint. So let's speak about the mold creation. So we decided to use a 3D printer using resin. And the purpose is to create a negative of the fingerprint and to use this mold for casting. Here is an example with Al Capone fingerprint. I can show you quickly how I create the fingerprint. So I use an application named ZBrush, which is a standard in the industry, and I use Al Capone fingerprint as an alpha. So basically, the model will react to the gray and black of the fingerprint. As you can see here, I can basically put the fingerprint on the mold, and it creates the fingerprint based on the color of the alpha. So it's pretty straightforward. We know that some security researchers make some automatization about that, and they're able to create this kind of mold by using Python script. But they didn't document it how they do it, and we decided to do it like that. But we can easily optimize the process by performing automatization. So we use a UV late printer, and we decided to print in 25 microns, which is a standard resolution for this kind of printer. It's not a very expensive printer. We have a budget lower than $2,000 US, so it's a really common printer. For information, your fingerprint ridge is about 500 microns wide and 50 microns deep. So the resolution of the printer perfectly match what we want. You will see we try a couple of different casting materials such as silicone, glue, fabric glue. We add some product on the materials to make them conductive, etc. We will see later the result of this different choice. One of the biggest constraints in our context was the size of the mold. to bypass authentication, we need to have exact same size in real life than your finger. And we will see it's the more complicated part of all the process. We will see why on the next slide. But basically, it's due to the resin cure. We need to cure resin used by 3D printer, and the cure process create retraction on the material, and the size of the mold can be a little bit different. I'm not speaking about 1 centimeter different, but few millimeters and few micron, but it's big enough to generate issue for the creation. Here is some picture of the mold creation. On the left, you can see 7 mold created on one printer, and after the mold are removed from the bed in order to be cured. On the right, you can see a UV chamber where the mold will be cured. And as I said, we had a couple of issues with curing and retraction of resin. You can see on the left a picture of all the fail attempt I did, and it was more than 50 bad mold for a good one. So it's really time consuming to have the exact size. I must be really careful about the curing time, how many minutes, and don't change the parameter in the middle of the research. So we trial different filling materials. We try silicone, glue, and as my colleague mentioned, there is some sensors that need capacitive. So we need to have something that is capacitive. For example, silicone does not conduct, so you cannot use silicone for that. So we decided to add some powder, conductive powder, such as graphite or aluminum. And the result was simply bad. It doesn't work. And finally, we found the perfect material. The winner is fabric glue. So with a really thin layer of fabric glue, we are able to create a fake fingerprint based on the mold I've 3D printed with great results. If it's thin enough, it's conductive enough if you put a real finger in the back. And we will show you the result of our tests.
Let's talk about our tests. We wanted to test as many platforms as we could. We tested different kinds of sensors, we tested different kinds of platforms, from embedded systems to laptops to mobile devices. These are the recordings of our tests. We started our tests with Samsung S10. As you can see, we are using a glove, which is not a problem because it's an ultrasonic sensor and there is no need for electrical conductivity. On the other kind of devices, like the iPad, we actually had to have a real finger behind the fake fingerprint in order to create the capacitor that will be detected by the sensor. The same happens with the padlock. As you can see, there is a silver square around the sensor, which will emit the signal that is then detected. Let's talk about the results of our tests. As you can see in the chart, most of the devices were defeated. In orange, you can see the direct collection method, in blue, the image sensor collection method, and finally, in yellow, you have the third-party method of collection. The most successful method was the direct one, and that makes sense because the mold will be more accurate. A special note should be made about the A70. Although we didn't defeat it, even under regular circumstances with a real finger, it fails most of the times. Another special note should be made about the Windows systems, which were never defeated as the embedded systems on the pen drives.
Let's speak about write-up. So our research was limited by low budget. So we spent less than $2,000 for the printer and the material to fill the mold. First thing, there is strictly no limitation on direct collection approach. It's super easy and the results are super high except on several specific platforms. We try to provide 3 real-world scenarios. The first one was about direct collection, the second one data from a real sensor, and the last one was third-party collection. We got a couple of limitations. The first one is the size. It's really hard to have a real-world size 3D printing object, like micron size object. Of course, we could have tools that support micron, or maybe with a microscope that support microns, we will be able to measure exactly the size and get something really, really accurate. So it would solve the problem, but it will increase the budget of this research. Secondly, UV exposure. So we need to cure resin because it's toxic, because it's not hard when it's not cured. So it's a mandatory step. However, we discovered that it altered the size of the object. So probably the resin is not the best material for this research, and we need something else. Another limitation we got is Microsoft Windows. We got real difficulties, and finally we were not able to unlock Windows system. Here is a video, for example, where you can see it doesn't work. So we don't really know why it doesn't work, but we have some expectation. When you think about a fingerprint reader, you need to define threshold from what is a good fingerprint, what is a non-good fingerprint. For example, if you cut a little bit your finger, you can still unlock your phone. It works. If your hands are not really clean, it should work. Your phone will be unlocked. How it works, the editor needs to define a threshold. How many points of your finger is enough to unlock a device? And maybe Windows, on Windows, you need more points to unlock the device. Maybe they need a lot more of points than a phone. And it's a hard choice for an editor, because if you ask for too many strict points to identify a fingerprint, you have the risk to have a lot of fail, and the user can complain because, oh, it almost never works. But if you are too weak and you only check few points, like 2 points, it will unlock really easily, even if it's not a good fingerprint. And editor need to identify and decide a threshold when a fingerprint is a good one and when it is not a good one. And we think Microsoft Windows put the threshold really high. It's not like on mobile where you unlock your phone a lot. Every 10 minutes you unlock your phone or whatever. On Windows, the philosophy is a little bit different. You don't unlock your system every 10 minutes. So maybe Microsoft decided to put the threshold super high compared to mobile, and that will explain why our system doesn't work.
So mitigations. There are that many mitigations the providers can do. You can always increase the number of positive links that you find in a fingerprint, like Microsoft seems to have done, but that may increase the number of false reads. So actually, the best mitigation that the providers can do is to limit the number of attempts. Although our results had a really high rate of positives, in the real world scenario, maybe people cannot do several attempts. So limiting the number of attempts, it's really the best mitigation. Apple devices already have a limit of 5 attempts, while Samsung have 50 with intervals in between, and well, Honor doesn't have any kind of limitation. In conclusion, we need to put these results into the context of our threat scenarios. As you can see, if we are worried about the petty crime that goes around if you lose your phone and someone will want to read the information on your phone, well, we would say that you can still use fingerprint authentication because it's not really that big of a problem. However, if your threat profile is much higher and you are worried about someone wanting to see your private information for other reasons, you should use a strong password with a token-based two-factor authentication. So the creation process is time-consuming, as we have shown, and it's not a linear one. So we go from collection to mold creation to finally the production. It's not something that you can just do overnight. I think one of the main conclusions is that since the generally available made in 2013 until now, the security of fingerprint authentication has not evolved as it may seem. So the reality is that fingerprint authentication is being used a lot in a lot more devices, different kinds of applications. However, its security level, it seems to be the same as in 7 years ago. So we should not consider as safe authentication to be used, especially if you are thinking on a higher risk threat profile. So one thing that we have also learned, and this was one of our first attempts, is that direct fingerprint does not work. We cannot print a fingerprint directly. We need to create a mold, and then we need to use a filling material. And that's the main reason. As we have shown, the filling material makes a big difference on our success. Having the right material that allows the electricity to pass through the real finger into the sensor, activating the sensor, especially on the active capacitive ones, it's a key element in all of this. And resin is not conductive. And you cannot mix different kinds of materials with the resin in order to make it more conductive. So that's one of the limitations. There are some improvements that can be done, of course. One of them is what we have already talked about, having scripts that do some part of the manual work. Using high precision tools will, of course, help, because then you can compare what you are reading with the mold. Eventually, using engraving instead of printing a mold can also be something that can be attempted. Well, the main thing here is that if you have enough money, you can pretty much make this a much more linear process, and you can make it easier and faster. With the current limitations that we have, this is what we could do. You can read the full detail of our research at the Talos blog, and just search for fingerprint research and you'll find it. Thank you all for watching.